engagement of people. And here is the Bank Employees Association telling the government, you may not have funds to foot the train fare of the migrants, but we are coming forth from our association's general funds to support it. This is a good news to start the day. Today we are in a session on right to information is a human right, and the 2005 RTI Act being introduced to you. We have in our midst our very good friend, my guide, most respected Venkatesh Naik, who is the head of the program unit on access to information of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, which is an international, independent, non-profit, non-governmental organization headquartered in New Delhi. He has assisted with the drafting of RTI laws in countries across South Asia, across Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. Now, this is a great achievement. Great achievement. I knew it, but it is different when I say it with him sitting here. He has trained more than 7,600 officers of the government and public sector enterprises for implementing India's transparency law, the right to information. Previously, a doctoral research fellow in history at the JNU, he has authored research and public education documents on the right to information and other governance and human rights related matters. He is also a member of the International Advisory Board of the Human Rights Program of the University of Arizona. He uses India's right to information law prolifically on matters of public interest. And if you fall in love with him, and he falls in love with you, you will receive continuous messages on his specialized WhatsApp groups. I think he's got several of them. I don't want to number them, where you will get the best information on right to information in this country, which will be shocking to many of you. He is also associated very, very closely with the National Campaign on People's Right to Information, the NCPRI as it's called, a people's movement, a campaign on the right to information. I'm happy to tell you, friends, that we have as one of our facilitators, Rolly, also from the NCPRI. Venkat Rolly is sitting somewhere inside.
Hi, Rolly. So nice to have you.
She facilitates group number 14.
Okay.
And therefore, let me wish you all the best.
Thank you.
He will speak for 20 minutes, then a 10-minute clarification, 20 minutes, 10-minute clarification, and then the last 10 minutes will be his. Over to you, Venkat. We are thankful to you for having accepted. I know you are a very, very busy person, but we are so happy you were able to make it on a Sunday afternoon. And we are extremely happy, and I'm sure we'll benefit a lot. There's going to be a lot of exercises and activities that will follow, which we will follow up. Venkat, don't need to worry. I've got the activities ready, don't need to worry. So the time will be yours in terms of the session.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
The floor
Henry.
is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Henry. A very good evening to all of you. I know I can't see most of you, but I hope you can see me. It's always a privilege to be associated with my human rights mentor, who is Henry. I remember cutting my teeth on what human rights is all about. What does it mean in India?
I'm trying to speak on the microphone. I'm not able to. He did not hear me.
Sorry, are you able to hear me?
Just make an announcement. Venkatesh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. One announcement I want to make.
Yeah, please go ahead.
There are a lot of participants today suddenly having issues with the audio. So all the facilitators announcement is, if you're able to hear me, I've also put up a message. Ask people to leave the room and re-enter. People can leave the room and re-enter again, and it might work.
I did
Shall I
that.
do that as well?
Not you.
Okay.
Those who are having problems. I did that and I came back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please go ahead, Venkat.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, Venkat, just one second. And
Okay, sure. Just let me know when I should go start.
yeah, just 1 minute. And participants, please check on your bottom left side of the screen if a speaker is selected. Next to the mute icon, you can see a small arrow. Just ensure that you have a speaker selected. Until then, you can't hear anything. Thank you. Over to you, Venkat. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So once again, let me start by wishing you all a very good evening. It's always a privilege to be associated with activities that Henry organizes. I consider Henry my own mentor on human rights, the understanding of human rights. I was fortunate enough in the very beginning of my career to attend multiple sessions which Henry resourced at various training programs, not only helping us understand the whole human rights discourse, but also the practicality of human rights work at the ground level. And it's again a very big privilege for me to be associated with this human rights education online course. And I hope to the best of my ability to take you through the basics of the right to information law and perhaps encourage you or maybe even instigate you to file right to information requests, RTI applications, if you have not been doing so already, for the purpose of seeking information from government. I'm sorry, in Delhi, we are having a rather bad day. It's a rather dusty day today. My window's open because I don't use air conditioners in my house out of respect for the climate and global warming. So I might be sneezing off and on. Kindly pardon me for that. But having said that, now let's get into the subject matter specifically of today's session, which is the right to information. Now, I know it's not possible to have an interactive session with you at the very beginning. Otherwise, I would have loved to start this conversation by asking you a couple of questions. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt the Upanishadic style where, as the author of the Upanishad, I will ask questions myself and I'll try and answer them without actually attributing the answers to any apprentice or novice. First of all, I'm sure over the last 6 days, you have acquired a very in-depth knowledge about human rights, about fundamental rights. Now, I'm going to talk to you about right to information, and I would like to draw a few parallels. Normally, when I conduct these kinds of training programs on human rights and fundamental rights for trainees, I ask them, what do they understand by fundamental rights? Let's leave human rights aside. Let's just take fundamental rights. Let's stick to the Indian context. Let's stick to our constitution. And very often I get responses saying that, okay, fundamental rights are basically those minimum guarantees of treatment, minimum guarantees of behavior, and minimum guarantees of things that are very essential for the purpose of every human being to lead or to be able to lead a life in dignity. So everything is founded on this principle of the dignified life of a human being. And what is that dignity is perhaps something that undergoes expansion, undergoes variation, undergoes changes, generation after generation, sometimes within a generation. And we are actually going through some of those very times where the whole understanding of human dignity is undergoing change, even as we speak. I don't need to remind you about the conditions of millions, crores of underprivileged people who are out on the roads, hundreds of thousands every day, trying to go back to their homes. By no stretch of imagination can that be called dignified life. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let me come back to this very understanding of the whole concept of fundamental rights. These are basic things, that basic standards of treatment, entitlements that are essential for every human being to be able to lead a dignified life. There is another side to this understanding. There is another dimension. And that dimension is something that is recognized by academics also in a very big way, where they say that human rights actually are like trumps on the power of the state. In other words, human rights actually define the boundaries where the power of the state ends. Now, very often, this kind of an understanding of fundamental rights and human rights, it arises from the central discourse of civil liberties. And what do we mean by civil liberties? These are basically freedoms. The right to life, the freedom of speech and expression, the freedom to pursue one's religion, the freedom to associate with our fellow human beings, freedom to form associations, the right to education, a whole range of things. So when we say freedom, 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 what it means is basically the limits on the power of the state and governmental agencies to interfere with those kinds of freedoms. Unless there are reasonable grounds to interfere, governments cannot impinge, their actions cannot have an adverse impact on people's freedoms. So in a sense, they are like the limitations on the power of the state, how far it can extend, how far it can expand. Now, this is the understanding of one dimension of fundamental rights, human rights, that arises from the Western democracies. So essentially, it is about these freedoms and these civil liberties are the negative obligations of the state. Do not interfere. Do not interfere into the privacy of citizens. Do not interfere with people's right to seek, obtain, and impart information. So these are actually restrictions, negative obligations. But from our developing countries, particularly from the then Soviet bloc, from the developing countries of Asia and Africa, another understanding of another segment of human rights arose, and that is what we popularly call economic, social, and cultural rights. Western democracies call them programmatic rights, where they said that, look, these are rights, for example, right to health, right to food, right to education. These are all things which actually should be implemented in the form of a program. They are programmatic rights. Governments have to implement them. In our countries, we call them people's entitlements, so we don't want to understand them as human rights the way we understand other kinds of freedoms and civil liberties. But in developing countries, we said, no, if poverty has to be addressed, we have to start with basic economic social rights, right to food, right to health, right to shelter, right to clothing, right to safe drinking water. So there are these two dimensions where there is a positive obligation on the state to ensure that they take actions, they spend money, they develop plans and programs to ensure that these economic, social, and cultural rights are available to people. And on the other hand, the negative obligations define the limits that states can actually, the limits where the state, the governments and its agencies can exercise their power. Now, the right to information is a very unique kind of a human right or a fundamental right, if you may want to call it, which has dimensions of both dimensions which I described right now. It is a negative obligation in the sense that government's power to determine what information about its actions, its decisions will be made available to people, it determines those limits. In the sense, the government cannot arbitrarily and unilaterally, on the basis of a whim or fancy, deny access to information about its functioning to people. So in that sense, it's a negative obligation. It defines the limits of how much information the government can keep away from public scrutiny and under what circumstances. It is also a positive obligation in the sense that the right to information recognizes the entitlement of citizens to seek and receive information from government agencies about what they are doing or what they are not doing. So both dimensions are there. The negative obligation not to interfere or arbitrarily restrict people's access to information, and the positive obligation to give information to people on demand. So these two dimensions are encapsulated in the whole idea of right to information. Now, where does this right to information arise from? If you take up part 3 of the Constitution, which I'm sure you've been reading extensively over the last 6 days, you will not find an explicit mention to the right to information anywhere in the chapter. That is because it is a right that has been discovered by our constitutional courts, particularly our Supreme Court, as part of existing fundamental rights that are listed in the Fundamental Rights chapter. In 1975, the Supreme Court said the right to freedom of speech and expression that is recognized in Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution, it includes within its meaning and scope people's right to know what the government is doing. Later on in the mid-1980s, the Supreme Court said, oh, that is not all, but people's right to know what government is doing is an essential part of people's right to life and liberty that is guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution. And more recently, in the year 2010, a full bench of the Delhi High Court said the right to information, people's right to information, people's right to find out and get credible information about what government is doing also arises from Article 14 of the Constitution, which guarantees the right to equality and equal treatment for all persons before the law. So the right to information is actually founded, it is included in a range of fundamental rights. They are there, at least these three fundamental rights are their source. And our own understanding over the last 15 years of looking at the implementation of the right to information law around in the country and in other jurisdictions is right to information is an absolutely crucial tool for securing other fundamental rights, other human rights that are guaranteed by constitutions and by international human rights instruments. I'll not get into too much of detailing because I'll leave certain things for you to ask questions later on. Now let me move in to giving you a snapshot view of how does one exercise the right to information. I've said earlier, for the first time, Supreme Court said in 1975 that yes, people have a right to know everything that the government is doing. They gave a justification. Why should people know everything that the government is doing? They said, because we are a democracy. Why so? Democracy, the easiest and the most popular definition is something that Abraham Lincoln gave in 1860s in Gettysburg, when the American Civil War was almost coming to an end. He said democracy means, he didn't say democracy, he didn't give it in a definitional form. It was the last sentence of a short speech, but very inspiring speech that he gave, where he said it's government of the people, by the people, for the people. So in democracy, if people are the stakeholders, and when I say people are stakeholders, please do not get me wrong. When I say people are stakeholders, I am not excluding people who are within government. Politicians are very much part of those people. Bureaucrats who sit and implement decisions of the politicians in power are also very much part of the people. So there is no us versus them. When I say people, I mean the entire citizenry of India, and also in certain respects, everybody who is not a citizen but who is residing in the territory of India. So when we say people, we include everybody within the meaning and scope of that term. So when people are the stakeholders in a democracy, then the information that government collects or collates or creates in the course of doing their work does not become government property. It is actually information that belongs to the people. Why? It's being created, it is being generated, it is being used, and in certain circumstances, it is being disseminated in the name of the people. Contrary to popular understanding, the government of India is not the government of the NDA or the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. NDA has been elected to power today. 6 years ago, it was the UPA. The government is actually the government of the people. The NDA, the Prime Minister, the ministers, and the officers who work in government at the central and the state and the district and even the village level are not the owners of the information that they create. They are the custodians of the information that they create. Why? They should not be taking this information home. Once they retire, maybe some of you will join their jobs and you will become the custodians of information. So essentially, information is something in government. When I say information here, it is information that is created or generated or collected in the course of the government doing its work. There's a whole lot of information out there in the private sector, which we are not including in this category. We are in the context of the public sphere. A lot of information about the functioning of private bodies also will come within this ambit of right to information, as I will explain shortly. But right now what we need to understand is that government files which contain information about the government's working are not government property, they are public property. And the right to information law recognizes that. What the right to information law does is it creates procedures, it lays down methodologies, it lays down time limits for giving access to information to people. It lays down the procedures for people to seek and receive information within time limits. And if those time limits are not adhered to, if you do not get the information that you are supposed to receive legitimately as a matter of right, then there are consequences for denying information. So the right to information is actually a complete law which not only explains what kinds of rights of access citizens have vis-a-vis information held in government files across the country, starting from Rashtrapati Bhavan down to your Gram Panchayat. It explains the time limits within which responses must be given, information must be provided. It also lays down the grounds on which access to information in government files may be legally and legitimately refused for people. And if information is refused to a requester, the right to information law also lays down the appeals procedures. So it is not one person's decision that will hold good for all time to come. There are at least two levels at which the decision to refuse access to information can be challenged. So that is what we are going to look at. I know time is running short, so let me quickly take you through the basic procedures as far as access to information under the right to information law is concerned. First and foremost, a PowerPoint presentation has been shared with all of you through the organizers of this program, where the basics of the right to information law are explained in simple language. Along with that, a user guide in English has been shared with all of you, which explains how the law can be used by anybody for the purpose of seeking information. So I would urge you all, if you haven't done that already, please do read these books. Please do take a look at the PowerPoint presentation. They will help you in understanding how to exercise your right to seek and obtain information from government. Now, the basics of the right to information law. First of all, the law defines what is information, and it is defined very broadly. I will not go into too much of detailing. Let us take that up in the context of question answers. But basic understanding should be, please remember this always, any information that is available in material form in government custody falls within the definition of information. It could be on paper files, it could be on computers, it could be on audiovisual tapes, it could be in the form of samples of materials used in public construction works, or samples of food grains that are distributed to the fair price shops. All of that becomes information. The notings that government officers write on the left side of a file explaining why a certain decision should be taken or why it should not be taken, all of those discussions on paper also become information for the purpose of RTI Act. You have a right, theoretically speaking, to access it. So there is nothing in government files, in government records, that is kept outside the ambit of the definition of right to information. That is point number one. Point number two, the law also explains in what all forms you can ask information and get it as a matter of right. You can seek photocopies, you can seek certified copies, you can ask for inspection of the government files, you can ask for the electronic records that are held on computers, you can actually demand inspection of construction works that the public authorities are involved in on a daily basis. You can go and stand there for the number of hours that you want and inspect it as a matter of right. They cannot shoo you away. And most importantly, although this is not mentioned in the Right to Information Act, that is the basic spirit of the Right to Information Act. You have the right to get accurate and complete information that is contained in government records. There is no privilege in the law that is allowed for the ministers or the prime minister or the clerks in government offices to create false information and give it to you just because you are asking for something which they don't want to give you. No. The overall understanding of the Right to Information Act is you have a right to get complete and accurate information. And if you are able to establish that you did not get complete and accurate information, there is a penalty possible on the officers concerned. But we will get into that a little later. Now, the law describes two procedures for people to access information. Now, unfortunately, the right to information law is available only to citizens. Foreigners cannot make use of the Indian right to information law. Why so? I will explain that a little later when we take up question and answers. But for the time being, let us just understand how the law is structured. So citizens have this right. The first process of accessing information, as many of you might be aware if you've used the right to information law, is proactive access, which means a whole range of information, government departments, public authorities, municipalities, Indian Army, Tamil Nadu Police, Chennai Police, Coast Guard, Navy, Air Force, ISRO, all of them have to put a whole lot of information about what they are doing, how they are working, what rules they use in their working, how much budgets they get, how do they spend that money, what kinds of powers their officers have, what kinds of duties and responsibilities do they have, what is the chain of decision-making process on every issue that they are dealing with. All of this information should be made available to you voluntarily, which means this information should be made available to you without waiting for you to file a formal RTI application. That is the first process. Apart from that, the law also says that whenever government makes decisions or announces policies that affect people, the people who are affected by those decisions and policies have the right to know all relevant facts, and they have the right to know the reasons why such policies and decisions have been made. And this is not something that must be done once in a year. This is something that must be done routinely. So the primary focus of the right to information law is to make available government held information to people proactively, voluntarily, without waiting for people to ask for it. Then comes the second process. And that second process is for people to file information applications formally on paper or through emails or RTI online facilities and ask information. Now these are called RTI applications. If you pick up the phone and then ask the officer at the other end of the line for some information, that does not become a formal request process under the RTI Act. It has to be put down either on paper or in electronic form and submitted. Who do you submit this RTI application to? It is submitted to the public information officer. And every department, every public office, every government office has to designate at least one officer from its ranks to become the public information officer who will take your RTI application and give a decision on it. They cannot refuse to take your RTI applications, even if they do not have the information that you are asking in their records. For example, you want some information from, let us say, the health department. And you are asking that information, you are filing it with the health department. But the health department suddenly realizes, oh, this is information we don't have with us. It's actually available with another government hospital. So they cannot tell you to go to that government hospital and ask the information from them. The law says that health department's public information officer must accept that RTI application from you and transfer it to that hospital in 5 days and tell you about the transfer. Ordinarily, when you seek information on paper or through emails, if you are above the poverty line, then you have to pay 10 rupees as application fee. Government of India, Tamil Nadu, and most of the states, 10 rupee application fee is common. People below the poverty line, however, can ask information free of cost. They only have to attach a copy of their BPL identity proof. Now, once your RTI application is submitted to the public information officer, he has a duty to give you a response, either give you information or tell you why the information can't be given within 30 days. However, if information relates to either your life or liberty or somebody else's life or liberty, there is no 30-day long period. That information must be given within 48 hours. If you are above the poverty line applicant and you are asking for information, then if that information can be disclosed, the public information officer will charge you at the rate of 2 rupees per page for photocopying the information that you want. Same charges for certified copies also. And once you submit that, what is called additional fees, which is the photocopying charges, then you can get the information. You can also inspect the records held by government offices. And in all states and the central government, the first hour for inspection is always free. Then they can charge you at the rate of 5 rupees for every hour, or in some states it is 5 rupees for every 15 minutes. Supposing the public information officer says that no, this information can't be given, he can't do that on his own. The law gives guidance. Section 8 of the RTI Act contains 10 clauses. It contains 10 legitimate grounds on the basis of which access to information can be denied. Public information officer cannot say that, look, my boss told me I can't give you information, therefore I'm not giving you information. That is the wrong answer. He cannot say the chief minister of my state told me don't give the information, therefore I'm not able to give you information that you want. That is the wrong answer. The law says there are only 10 grounds on the basis of which you can refuse access to information legitimately. If the information that an applicant wants does not fall in those 10 grounds, then it must be given, irrespective of whoever holds whatever opinion about it. Now, what are these 10 grounds? First and foremost, if information that you are asking and if it is disclosed, if it will adversely impact our national security, our defense interests, adversely impact our economic interests, if it will adversely impact our foreign relations with countries abroad, those kinds of information, the law says there is no duty to give. Some information that you want, it relates to trade secrets of a company, and disclosure will harm their competitive position, then it is legitimate and legal to say, sorry, we can't give you the information. Information that is exchanged between you and your lawyer or between you and your doctor, that information is covered by what is called fiduciary relationship. Fiduciary means trust-based relationship. Where we repose trust in our doctor, we repose trust in a lawyer, and we share a whole lot of information with them about our case. Now, that information you cannot ask under RTI about any other person. Information which will cause adverse impact to an ongoing police investigation. Information whose disclosure may cause an adverse impact to a prosecution process. Information which may be used to prevent a culprit from being arrested for a crime. That kind of information can be legitimately refused. Wherever information, if it is disclosed, if it is likely to endanger the life or safety of a person, or if it will disclose the identity of an intelligence informer. If you ask for such information, the public information officer is within his rights to say, no, sorry, the law does not permit me to release this information. Cabinet papers, state level, central level, whenever the ministers sit down and take a decision, prior to that decision-making process is being completed, before that is completed, you cannot ask for that information. Even if you ask for it, you won't get it. But once the decision is complete, the matter is over, then what was that decision? What was the basis on which that decision was taken? What were the reasons for that decision? What all materials went into the consideration of the decision-making process? All of that has to be made public proactively. And the law also says, whenever there is some information that you are asking, and if the disclosure will violate the privacy of an individual, you cannot ask your neighbor's bank account details under the RTI Act. Sorry, I think I should correct my language here. You can ask. The law says it cannot be given. Now, this is a crucial difference that you need to understand. Every time you file an RTI application, you are exercising two fundamental rights. A, you are exercising your right to know, that is understood. But the very act of writing an RTI application is an expression of your right to freedom of speech and expression. So there is no bar on the information that you can ask. All that section 8 says is under what circumstances information can be legitimately refused to be given. So don't stop at anything. If you think some information is worth asking because it is of public interest, relevance, go ahead and ask for it. Then let us see how the law is applied by the public information officer to refuse access. In addition to all of this, there is one more important principle in the RTI Act. It says whenever information that cannot be denied to an MP or MLA on the floor of the House, that information cannot be denied to citizens. Now, what does this principle mean? It basically means this. We are citizens of the country, we vote and we elect representatives. They go to Parliament, they go to the Assembly, they raise questions. Government has to respond. And whatever information they are entitled to get, they are our agents because we've sent them there. We are the principals. So that information we also have the right to get from government. Government cannot refuse that information to us. In addition to that is another very interesting principle, and that is called public interest disclosure. Now, there could be a situation where certain kinds of information ordinarily, it may come under section 8, one of the 10 clauses, and public information officer may refuse to give it to you, saying, no, the law does not permit me to release this information. But if you can demonstrate how public interest will be served better by disclosure of even such sensitive information, then the law says that information should be given. So wherever disclosure of even exempt information will override the concern to keep it confidential, and that overriding factor has to be supported by public interest grounds, then that information should be given. Now, what is public interest ground? It could be the necessity of preventing or investigating corruption. It could also be the necessity of holding government accountable. It could also be the necessity of protecting the environment. It could also be the necessity of ensuring public safety and public health. These are all public grounds on which you can challenge even legitimate refusal of the public information officer to release information and say, no, but public interest demands disclosure of even this sensitive information, which ordinarily the law says should be kept confidential. Then what happens? Supposing, let us say, the public information officer refuses to give you information. Then the law creates an appeals process, and that is a two-tier appeals process. The first appeal is within the same government office. An officer senior in rank to the public information officer is empowered to listen to your grievance about lack of access to information. Supposing you don't get a response at all, 30 days are over, no response. Even then, you can file a first appeal with the appellate authority within 30 days of that date. And then within the next 45 days, the appellate authority has to decide on your appeal and take a call on whether the public information officer was correct in refusing access to information to you. If you are unhappy with the quality or the quantity of information that you get, which means you got some information, but you're not happy with it, even then you can file an appeal with this appellate authority and demand that your grievance be addressed. Supposing you're not happy with the response of the first appellate authority also, then the law says the next stage of appeal is outside the government sector, and that is in the state level, it is before the State Information Commission. In the central level, it is before the Central Information Commission. In simpler terms, it means if a public information officer of state government has refused access to information to you, you can challenge that decision before the State Information Commission in that particular state. And if the central government's public information officer has refused access to information to you, you can challenge that decision before the Central Information Commission. One thing, please remember, you cannot challenge a State Information Commission's decision before the Central Information Commission decision, before the Central Information Commission. That is not possible. It's not like you challenge a High Court decision before Supreme Court. That is not permissible under the RTA Act. Your matter will end at the State Information Commission level for states, and at the Central Information Commission level, it will end for the central government. After that, you can go to High Courts and then the Supreme Court. All of that is under the Constitution. The RTA Act is silent about those further grievance redress procedures. You can file a writ petition and challenge the State Commission's decision or the Central Information Commission's decision in your High Court. And there also, if you're not happy, you can go to the Supreme Court. That is permissible. Now, what happens if a public information officer unreasonably refuses to receive your application? You see, this is a very interesting part of the RTA application. Supposing you go to a government office, public information officer is sitting there. He says, I'm not taking your RTA application, go back home. That is a penalizable contravention of the RTA Act, which means that you can demand a penalty on that public information officer for refusing access to information. There are other grounds also. Giving you information that is incomplete or false knowingly, not responding to you at all within time limit, and there is no good cause at all for that. These are all, or destroying information that you asked. These are all grounds on which penalty can be imposed by the concerned Information Commission. And if you are able to demonstrate that you actually incurred a loss because the public information officer wrongly refused information to you or gave you information so late because of which you incurred a loss, you are entitled to unlimited amounts of compensation. So this is, roughly speaking, the Right to Information Act's procedures and practices. I will stop here, and now we can take up question answers. There are several other dimensions of the RTA Act and the whole, there's been 15 years of experience of people using this Right to Information law. That's something that we can talk about in the next part of this session. I'll stop here. Over to you, Henry.
Matthew, 3 questions, please.
Yes.
Matthew? Yes.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. I'm trying to follow questions on two portals because we have also done it live on Facebook because some participants were unable to hear it.
Okay.
So, so a participant asked Venkatesh,
Yeah.
can public request to the state health department be made to provide information with regard to the number of hospitals conducting tests during the COVID-19?
Yes, of course. That is information that should be asked. And in fact, I'm so glad this question has been raised. Some of this information you don't actually even need to ask. Why? Because the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India, has actually created a Google map where, as of 2 weeks ago, when I saw it last, all the testing centers had been mapped on that Google map. Now, there could be many more which are actually not plotted on that Google map. So it is perfectly within your rights to ask your state health department where all testing centers are located, what is their address, what kind of facilities do they have, and how does one approach them, what are their telephone numbers, all of that you can ask. And in fact, if I remember right, during a lockdown phase, you don't really have to go to that particular testing center. They have to send you people to your residence or wherever you are to collect the samples. If I remember right, that is what the protocol is.
Thank you, Venkatesh.
Okay.
There's only one more question, and
Okay.
you can answer it now or later. But there is a participant who would like to know more with regard to the education details of the Prime Minister, that RTI. So maybe now or later, it's up to you. Yeah.
Okay, that matter unfortunately has been already decided by the Central Information Commission, and the commission said that this information about his degree qualifications must be made public. When we say degree qualifications, this particular case was about copies of the degree certificates. Details of educational qualifications, the Honorable Prime Minister has already made public in his election affidavits. People are asking for supporting documents, and the Central Information Commission said it must be disclosed. Today, however, that decision of the CIC has been challenged before the Delhi High Court and the Gujarat High Court. So the matter is sub judice. So we are waiting for how these high courts are going to decide on the disclosure. People like you and I don't know how common that practice is in other states, but I know in some of our, ancient ancestral homes, our parents and grandparents would actually frame up the degree certificates and display them prominently in the main hall of their house. It's that public information. You go to a doctor's clinic, if it is a doctor who's actually gone through 5 years of MBBS and has received his license, the education certificate and the license are all prominently displayed on the main wall of his clinic or the lady doctor's clinic. I don't know why such a big hullabaloo has to be made about the degree qualifications of somebody like the Prime Minister. And ultimately, what does it matter? The Constitution of India does not prevent even an unlettered person from contesting elections and rising to the position of the Prime Minister of India. So it is immaterial. It's an unfortunate controversy that has been created, as has happened in many cases where basic, simple, inconsequential information becomes a bone of contention and ends up wasting taxpayers' money in prolonged litigation. So I would very humbly and respectfully suggest to our friend who raised this question, please look at other important public interest matters that are burning and that are actually leading to tears of blood being shed by hundreds of thousands of our brother and sister migrant workers.
Yeah, thank you, Venkatesh. Just two questions. I'll put them together to you, and then we can continue the session.
Yes.
One is it necessary that an individual requesting information specify the purpose for what the information is required for? The second question is, can refugees who stay in India for a long time demand RTI, which may be crucial for their life and liberty?
Very excellent points. The first question is actually covering up a gap in my presentation. Because of shortness of time limit, I was not able to cover everything. The Right to Information Act in Section 6, subsection 2, very clearly says a public information officer cannot compel you to disclose your purpose for seeking information, which means it is a negative obligation on the public information officer. He cannot compel you to tell him why you want the information. However, you are completely at your liberty to explain why you want the information, because there is no bar on your proactively disclosing your reasons for seeking information. A lot of people, before they explain what information they want in their RTI applications, they actually say why they want the information. Nothing wrong in it. It is just that if you don't want to disclose your purpose, the law says you are within your rights, and the public authority, the State Information Commission or the Central Information Commission cannot compel you to disclose your reasons for asking information. That's point number one. Point number two, refugees. Unfortunately, the Right to Information Act, like I said in the beginning, is restricted in its application only to citizens of India. So unless the refugee has been granted citizenship status, which means she is no longer a refugee, they cannot make use of the Right to Information law. And there is a problem there. We had said that, look, you may pass a law to give effect to the right to seek and receive information as a part of the freedom of speech and expression in Article 19(1)(a). That is available only to citizens. However, Supreme Court has said the right to know is part of right to life. That is available under Article 21 to anybody, irrespective of citizenship. Even refugees can ask for it. A foreigner can ask for it. That right to know is already there. So therefore, there is no need to impose restrictions based on citizenship. However, the government, in its wisdom, decided that no right to information law will be made applicable only to citizens. So that is where we stand as of today. Hopefully that will change in future, but that is a long haul.
Thank you, Venkatesh. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any more questions?
No, we can continue and we can come back to it later.
Okay. Now in the second part of my presentation, I just want to share with you a couple of examples of how you can turn an issue into an RTI application. And for that, I have to share my screen. So Henry and Matthew, I'm going to share my screen. I hope that's okay with you.
Yes.
Yeah. One moment. Let me just go through that. Now, okay. So let's take this. I hope you can see my screen. This is actually the letterhead of our Chief Labor Commissioner. Is it visible to everybody?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. Now, this is a circular that was released on 8th of April by the Chief Labor Commissioner, whose office is based in Shram Shakti Bhavan in Delhi. It was a simple circular. It said that, look, there are huge problems of migrant workers who are stranded and placed in temporary shelters. They are in camps organized by state governments. They are at work sites, or they are in clusters along roads or in open fields. So they said that all information about such workers must be collected within 3 days, and it must be shared with the Chief Labor Commissioner. Now this is a simple circular. And then they gave a template for capturing the data. And they said this kind of data should be collected for both blue collar laborers, about 14 categories, as well as white collar workers like IT and communication, those who are involved in e-commerce or other kinds of work. Now this is a circular. My director of CHRI sent this to me and he said, can you do something about this? I got it after about 4 or 5 days of the circular being issued. Then I waited for about 15 days and I decided to file an RTI application, and the text of that RTI application I'm going to share with you right now. Because this is central government, I can file RTI applications through the online facility that has been set up. It is called rtionline.gov.in. Now this facility is available only to public authorities of Government of India. This cannot be used either for Delhi state government, nor can it be used for any of the other state governments or union territory administrations. It is exclusively for about 2,400 plus public authorities under Government of India. So what did I do? I filled up my basic details. All of this can be filled up on that website itself, and then it creates this PDF file. So there I filed a simple RTI, my information request was simple. I said that, look, your DO letter that went on 8th April to all regional heads from the Chief Labor Commissioner's office about collecting data, 3 categories of migrant workers. those who are in shelter and relief camps organized by state governments, those who are stranded in the work sites of their employers, or those who are clustered in some localities. So I want state-wise names of these districts. I want district-wise numbers of male and female migrant workers. I want occupation-wise numbers. I only want numbers. I don't want names. In my first query, I said I want names of districts only. I didn't want names of the migrant workers. So all this information that you have collected, I said, don't give it to me. Who am I? I can't even use this with the Raddiwala if they send me 5,000 pages of information. But this is information of immense public interest. People have a right to know who is stranded, in what numbers, in which place. So I said, form of access sought. Upload all this information on a government website and share the URL with me and tell me where this information has been uploaded. So you can see one circular that was converted into an RTI application and that was submitted. Interestingly, what happened with this RTI? Let me stop sharing now. Okay. The Chief Labor Commissioner's office told me they don't have any information to give. So now this matter has been submitted to the Central Information Commission as a complaint, saying that, look, when there is a government circular and the circular says collect the information and make it available to the central office in 3 days, you cannot tell me that information is not available. And now I've asked the Central Information Commission to conduct an inquiry and find out what exactly is the truth of the matter, and whatever information that the government may actually hold about migrant workers, that should be made public. I know today that information may not be valid anymore because many hundreds of thousands of workers may no longer be, in fact, they actually are no longer in the places where they were sheltered earlier. They've all either gone, most of them have either gone back or they are walking back home. It doesn't matter. We would still want to know how much information was collected from which districts so that you get a picture of what it looked like before people started walking back home. It is still in the public interest to disclose this information. So this is one example. Now I'll share another example of how something that one reads in the in the news reports that you get on your WhatsApp, or if you are still getting newspapers, how do you convert that into an RTI application? Now, this is a story that was published on the 14th of May. It was actually reporting of the basic contents of video conferencing that our Honorable Health Minister in the Government of India had with the Punjab government. And there he said that, look, we are conducting 1 lakh tests per day. And some further details about this particular story was given here. Then they said he said what was the fatality rate so far, what is the recovery rate so far, how many active patients are in ICU, how many are in the oxygen on oxygen support, etc. Sorry, before I start, I don't think you were able to see my screen. Let me just put it up for you. Yes, now can you see my screen? Matthew, can you see my screen?
I can see. It's article,
yes. Yeah. So this is published in the Indian Express. I just downloaded it. And then based on this, I didn't file my RTI. What I did was, I went to the source of information. And the source of information was actually a press release that was put out by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare about this very conversation. And I found this on the website of the Press Information Bureau. Now, this is authentic information. Why? We don't know. Of course, it is Indian Express, very reliable newspaper, but there could be a minuscule chance of some fake news. Government will say, I don't know what the newspaper is reporting. It is not my business to verify what they're saying. But if I were to base my RTI application on the government's own press release, then they cannot tell me that, look, you are asking for non-existent information. Why? Because I'm saying that you told this to the whole citizenry in the first place. So I went through the whole narrative of the conversation between the Honorable Health Minister and the government of Punjab. And from this, I culled out some important issues. And I said, let me ask questions about this. Again, since it's Government of India, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, I filed the RTI through the online RTI portal. And I asked for this information. I said that, look, I am attaching a copy of this press release. It's dated 13th May 2020. it is available on your Press Information Bureau's website. So tomorrow they can't tell me which one are you talking about. So it has been attached. Now you tell me, you are saying that you've sent so many lakh of N95 masks and personal protective equipment to every state. These are dashboard figures. Can you tell me how many you sent to which state, union territory, or central institution? Give me figures. Now this is only state, union territory, and central institution wise. Then every day I used to watch. Sorry. So then my first question, which is this one. They said, we've tested so many people. I don't want names. Tell me district wise, how many samples have you tested so far for probability of COVID-19 infection? Give us district wise data. Now, why is this important? Because we only have access to either countrywide figures or statewide figures. We don't know how much of testing is being done in which district. And this is crucial information that must be placed in the public domain for people to understand, so that their confidence levels in what the government is doing to ensure that adequate levels of testing are done, that gets strengthened. This is not somebody being nosy. This is about using the RTI to push the government to become a little more transparent than it already is, so that people's confidence levels in what government is doing can be raised, number one. And number two, if the government is not doing enough, then people can actually put pressure on the government through various sources to do much more. So therefore, having this information in the public domain is crucial. Then my third question and last category of questions in this was simple. Every day while having my lunch or dinner, we switch on the television set and we see public interest, public, broadcasting that happens, public messaging about COVID. I'm able to watch only some English and Hindi news channels because I'm based in Delhi. We get one Kannada channel. There isn't much of this kind of publicity. So I was able to see day after day the famous Bollywood actor Amitabh Bachchan appearing on television. And then for Arogya Setu app, another Bollywood celebrity, Ajay Devgan, who's appearing and saying, how important Arogya Setu is. So it was a simple question that I asked. Can you tell me which all celebrity figures you have engaged for the purpose of public education? How much payment have you made to them already? How much payment is pending to be made? And because TV channel advertising is not ordinarily free of cost, so I've asked channel-wise, which TV channels have you paid money for? And for which channels are you still required to pay money for this public education messaging? Now again, I didn't want information to myself. Why? This is information that should be available in the public domain. So I said, put all this information on an official website and then tell me where that information is available. So this is how I file RTIs. I've filed several others. I don't want to go into those details because again, I'll be taking too much time. So maybe what we can do is I can stop here. And if you have any further questions, we can get into those questions. But my last point in this particular part of the session is this, that look, almost any and every news item that you see in newspapers or on television or in your WhatsApp groups or on your own smartphones, 8 out of 10 or even 9 out of 10 of them have RTI potential for probing further, for getting more detailed information. So if you can cultivate this habit of looking at every story from an RTI angle, then you don't have to struggle about on which topic am I going to file RTI, what kind of information I'm going to ask from government, because it will become apparent immediately after you read a news story. It's one person. I don't have a staff that helps me regularly right now because we are all working from home. So this is part of about 8 or 10 RTI applications that I filed since the second phase of the lockdown. There again, I made a conscious decision. I said first phase of the lockdown, most government offices except for the frontline ones were not functional. So I did not file a single RTI application at that point of time. Second phase of lockdown onwards, skeletal services in Government of India have started and in several other state governments. So I said, okay, now transparency cannot wait. There are crucial questions that people are asking. So let us make a beginning, and therefore these RTI applications are being filed. So let me stop here and over to you, Henry and Matthew.
Thank you, Venkatesh. Some participants have written that they could not see your screen when you shared the RTI, spoke about the RTIs you have filed. That is okay. If you can
show once more, I'll just show one case. Is that okay?
That is fine. That is fine.
Okay, 1 second. Let me share my screen again. So let me take this. Okay, like I said, the second case in which I filed my RTI, this was based on a news story published in the Indian Express about the conversation which the Punjab government, which the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare had with the government of Punjab about what they are doing to tackle COVID. So I read the news report, then I said, okay, fine, can I find the official source of this news report? And I found it on the Press Information Bureau's website in the form of a press release. The title is here in front of you. So in that story, there were a whole lot of figures about testing, about recovery, about people in ICU, about people who've been cured, people on ventilators, etc., etc. So based on this, I filed an RTI application, and that is in front of you now. So I attached a copy of this press note, and I said, A, tell me the district-wise number of samples of COVID that you have tested from the very beginning, ever since you started testing on day one, when we realized that there is something called COVID and people's samples need to be taken for testing whether they're infected or not. From that very day till the date of filing this RTI, district-wise tell us how many samples have you tested. And then since the minister was saying that the government of India sent several lakh N95 masks and personal protective equipment, I said, how much have you sent to the states and to the union territory and central institutions? Here I realized that if I were to ask district-wise information, that will be too voluminous and they will say no to me. So I will just ask state-wise information, because even this information today is not publicly available. So I asked for this. Then, because I was watching so many public, Bollywood celebrities telling us what to do and what not to do to prevent the spread of COVID, I asked for names of all those celebrities whose services had been engaged for the purpose of public education messaging. Then I said, how much money have they actually been paid so far? Then I asked how much money remains to be paid to these people for the work that they did. Then I asked on which TV channels. I didn't ask for names of TV channels, but I basically said TV channel wise amounts of payment that you've made for telecasting these public education messaging, please tell us. And how many of these channels still remain to be played as on the date of my RTI, please tell us. Now again, I didn't want this information only to myself. I said, put this on an official website and tell me the URL. Why? Because then if it's put on an official website, it is no longer between me and the Ministry of Health Affairs, Family Welfare. It is available to the whole country. And in my limited understanding of transparency, I think these kinds of information people have a right to know. It should not actually require filing an RTI application. But because government is not making such detailed information available to people, we are just making a little push for proactive disclosure of this information. I'm still waiting for a response. Once the response comes, of course, I will be sharing it on the WhatsApp groups of which I'm a member. So I'm sure Matthew and Henry also receive this. So I request them to share that information with you. Any of you wants to receive it directly, my email address is available on the PowerPoint presentation last slide, which I've shared with the organizers of this program. So you can send me an email and I'm happy to include you in my database of addresses to whom I send my dispatches and email alerts regularly. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Venkatesh. There are two questions I'm going to put to you,
Sure.
which many people have asked.
Okay.
One is with regard to the recent amendments.
Oh, yes.
And people have asked, does it compromise the independence of CIC?
Yeah.
And what are the issues with regard to these particular amendments?
Okay.
A lot of people have asked with regard to this whole PM CARES fund.
Okay, so let's take them one by one. I
Yeah.
also have a memory like a sieve these days. There's just too much going on. So let me first address the first question. I'll address the PM CARES also. Then let's take up the others. Now, first of all, the amendments. Before I explain what they are, let me tell you and let me try and convince you. The scope of the right to information, what you can ask for, what you should be given, on what grounds access to information can be legitimately refused, time limits, none of these have been amended. So the scope of the right, the procedures are all intact. The way the law was passed in 2005, all of that remains. So please don't be worried. What was amended? The only thing that was amended was, originally the law said all information commissioners at the central and state level will be able to serve for 5 years up to the age of 65. Government amended that to say that you can serve up to 3 years or up to 65, but you cannot serve for more than 5 years, which means you won't get a guaranteed 5-year tenure. You can serve for 3 years, and then government, if it wants, it can renew or it can upgrade you to become Chief Information Commissioner. That is all. And you can serve not more than 5 years. So that is one change that has been made. What was being determined by the law earlier, now the central government wants to determine in the rules. So what they've made after amending the act is, they've said minimum tenure is 3 years, sorry, maximum tenure is 3 years, subject to the 65-year limit, age limit, and subject to a maximum of 5 years per appointee. Beyond that, they cannot serve. And this is something that they can change from time to time as and when they want by amending the rules. The second change that they brought in through the amendments was to say what would be the salary given to the information commissioners. Earlier, the salary of the information commissioners was fixed by the law itself. Parliament had control on that. But by making the amendments, central government has taken away that control. So the actual salaries to the chief information commissioners remains the same. The state information commissioners and the central information commissioners, other than the chief commissioner, their salaries have come down by 25,000 rupees. And here, the government has taken under its control the power to determine through the rules the salaries of information commissioners as and when it wants. So individually, they cannot change the salary levels of any commissioner after appointment, but they can change it for a batch of fresh appointees. For example, they can say that, look, in the northeastern states, except for Assam, there isn't much workload. For example, Mizoram, in I think 2 years ago, they did not get a single second appeal in an entire 365-day period. So they might just say that, look, these kinds of commissions where there isn't much work, we will reduce the salary levels. But in other commissions, salary levels will remain the same. So that gives a lot of control to the central government to determine salaries and tenures. And we think this is completely antagonistic to the original scheme of the RTI Act, where because the government is almost always the opposite party in an appeal proceeding before the Information Commission, because it has to justify why information was not given. It has to justify why information cannot be given. It has to justify why information was delayed. It has to justify why it thinks information supplied was adequate, whereas the appellant is saying, no, it is not adequate, either in terms of quantity or quality. So in such circumstances, being the opposite party, government should not have the power to determine salaries and tenure of information commissioners. So this whole amendment is now under challenge before the Supreme Court of India. So let us wait and see what is going to come out of that. Now, as far as PM CARES fund is concerned, there is a lot of confusion about whether it is covered by the RTI or not. Unfortunately, a lot of the discussion has happened around whether the PM CARES fund itself is a public authority or not. Let us not get into that trap. Whatever money is coming into the PM CARES fund, and most recently, PM CARES fund has said, what are they going to spend a portion of those donations on? That is information which is held by the Prime Minister's office. And because it is materially and physically held by the Prime Minister's office, it is covered by the definition of information under RTI Act. And Prime Minister's office has a duty to give a reply. Supposing that funding which is being spent on various things is routed through different departments, it still becomes information physically held by those departments. You can file RTIs through them or to them, and you can legitimately expect them to respond. I have myself filed RTIs with the Prime Minister's office on a couple of things. I'm waiting for a response as and when it comes. I'm not asking them to declare PM CARES fund as a public authority. I'm only saying that you have to give this information under RTI because your office is a public authority. And this PM CARES fund information that you have is within the definition of information. And I have every right to ask for it. If you don't want to give, it is your privilege, but I will challenge this matter before the Central Information Commission if I am not happy with your response, or if I'm not happy with the quantity or the quality of information that you give me. I'll stop here.
Okay. I think one question and then you can continue.
Yeah.
Is with regard to the announcements made by the finance minister.
Yes.
Now, with regard to public institutions being either fully privatized or partially privatized.
Yes.
So, if privatized fully or partially, will these institutions come under the purview of the RTI?
Okay. Now there are. It has a two-part answer. The RTI Act, of course, like I said, applies to all government departments, public sector enterprises, etc., etc. But if there is any non-government organization, by non-government organization, what we mean is an organization that is not strictly speaking part of the government sector. It does not necessarily have to be an NGO. It could even be a private organization. If they are substantially financed, which means if government is investing public funds to a large extent in such bodies, they will all be called public authorities. Now, after privatization, if government support or government investment in them gets reduced, they will obviously say that, look, we are privatized, we are not covered by the RTI Act. So it is a battle that will have to be fought all the way up to the courts to ask how much of continued investment of government money or public funding in these bodies is actually to be recognized as substantial funding, and therefore whether they are covered by the RTI Act or not. That is a long battle. But the second part of the answer is, even if they are privatized, let us take the example, heavens forbid, but if they say Steel Authority of India completely privatized, doesn't matter, because the definition of information in the RTI Act says that it includes all such information about private bodies that any government department or regulatory body can collect as a matter of right under any other existing law. So Steel Authority of India, once it is privatized, all their steel manufacturing factories, they will be covered by Industrial Disputes Act. So regarding labor issues, you can get a whole lot of information about them. They will be covered by the Factories Act. So under the Factories Act, a whole lot of information can be available about these private entities also. They will be covered by the Boilers Act. So the boiler related information that you want to ask, that will be covered by them. They'll be covered by all the sanitation laws and regulations. So whichever department is responsible for inspecting the nature of sanitation in their premises, all of that information about the private bodies, you can ask from those departments. So you may not be able to get information directly from the privatized body if it is declared that these bodies are no longer public authorities because they are not substantially financed, but you can get information about them from the regulatory agencies and the government departments that control them. So therefore, indirectly, they will also be required to give information. You will have the right to ask information about them also.
Thank you, Venkatesh. Maybe we can move towards concluding the session.
Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead. You can continue, Venkatesh.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I would only like to point out that, look, there could be a few reasons why you want to ask for information, and I'll demonstrate each one of them, in the form of an example. When you look at I would urge you all, if you haven't done this already, please read the RTI user guide that will be shared with you, or that has already been shared with you. The complete text of the RTI Act is given in the user guide. Please read the preamble. The preamble contains the very fundamental objectives of why this law has been passed, and that basically is connected with what I'm going to say, which is about the purposes for asking information. The first and foremost purpose is, according to the Right to Information Act, transparency is required. Why? We are a democracy and our citizenry has to be informed. It does not matter whether you will do anything or not do anything with that information. You must be informed because it is your democracy. Period. So you have a right to know. You may not want to do anything with that information later on, doesn't matter. If the law says that information should be made available to you, it should be made available to you, even if you will not make any further use of it. You will just get to know, you'll put it in your files, end of story, doesn't matter. It is a legitimate purpose for seeking information. Now, the second purpose for seeking information is to make government and its instrumentalities accountable to the people. So you can seek information for the purpose of accountability. For example, people were asking, one of the questions that I replied just now is whether the public sector enterprises that are privatized, can we get information about them? You can certainly try later on, like I explained, but what I would request you is, please ask for the entire decision-making process and the file notings that went into the decision to announce this by the finance minister. So what all discussion happened on paper? Who said, yes, this is a very good idea? Who said, no, but then this is not the way we should be going? Or that entire decision-making process, the details are covered by the RTI Act. All those file notings should be in the public domain. Why? Because of accountability. I'll give you an example. Demonetization happened in November 2016. Government announced, and then we all had to go and stand in front of banks in long queues to deposit the trashed currencies and collect the fresh ones. I filed an RTI asking, please give me the minutes of the Reserve Bank of India, where the board decided to recommend demonetization of those old notes. They struggled and refused and objected to disclosure. Finally, the Central Information Commission threatened them with a penalty show cause notice, and then they sent me the minutes. Now, what did the minutes reveal? The minutes revealed that the Reserve Bank of India actually rejected every single justification that the government of India was giving why demonetization should be done. But nevertheless, after giving all those objections as to why it should not be done, the last paragraph of the Reserve Bank of India's Board of Governors meeting, the minutes, they said we are approving the demonetization decision. Now, this kind of decision-making process should be in the public domain. Why? People should know what kind of thinking went into the making of these kinds of decisions. Now, it's not just about knowing, it could also be accountability. Tomorrow, if you get this information, you can go and challenge that in front of the courts. That is why it is crucial for the purpose of accountability. A third purpose for seeking information. The law itself says why the RTI Act was brought in. It was brought in so that transparency can help contain corruption. Hundreds of thousands of activists at the grassroots level are making use of the right to information law to expose petty corruption and increasingly big ticket corruption, large scale corruption also. Unfortunately, our anti-corruption mechanisms are not yet strong enough to deal with these exposures. Hopefully a time will come, but that does not mean because the anti-corruption mechanisms are so weak, we should stop all activism about in exposing corruption. No, it must still go on because people have a right to know. Eventually, we will reach a situation where things can be investigated, things will be investigated, and some remedial action will be taken. A, to prosecute those responsible for corruption, and B, to take preventive action so that such instances of corruption don't recur in future. And transparency is always the first step towards that. So please, I request you all to have these things at the back of your mind when you decide or when you make a decision about whether to seek information through RTI applications or not. Be clear about the purpose for which you will put your RTI interventions for. So I think I'm going to stop here, Matthew. Maybe the last 5 minutes can be used for winding up.
Yeah. Thank you, Venkatesh. Maybe Henry can come in now.
I will come in now. Thank you, Venkatesh. I want people to understand that we have with us the country's most sought for expert on right to information. You might think that is one person praising the other. And I will tell you something that I learned today from his presentation. He will not believe it, but I have to tell him the same. When you ask for an RTI, do not always ask information for yourself. If you want that information to be provided, and the applicant is Henry Tiffane, Venkat taught us today, don't ask the department to give the information to Henry Tiffane. If Henry Tiffane is convinced that this information is for public good, then make the department publish that information in some public website and inform you where it is. This is a strategy in right to information, because the purpose of right to information for people like Venkat He's not getting some information personally and then fighting a department. But the principle is promoting transparency in governance. We have done a number of RTIs, but we have never used this strategy. And he has a number of these strategies up his sleeves because he plays on both sides. He advises government and he stands with civil society. And he knows what all they will do on their side. And therefore, the strategies that he uses on the side of civil society are always very useful. I know, friends, that some of you had difficulties in hearing. Today is the first day we have had such audio issues. This must be something to do with Zoom and not with anything else. I had a perfect hearing, but there were some people who had problems. Therefore, there are two decisions I'm unilaterally taking. I did not even consult my core team. I could not get them on the phone. They were all busy. Matthew was busy with Venkat. Raj was busy with something else. And the decision I've unilaterally taken, I hope I have the support of my core group to say this. Today, we will not insist on attendance. So today will be an attendance-free day. We will not seek our attendance because I saw it fluctuating, 162. Right now, we have only 141. So there must some problem. Some people must have seen it on Facebook. I saw the Facebook live shots were also quite high. One. Two, therefore, we will not have a facilitators meeting this evening. Because most probably you will tell the facilitators you need to listen to the YouTube recording. I have checked with the office and they have assured me the next 1 hour the YouTube will be uploaded. And therefore I request each one of you to go through the YouTube hearing and then tomorrow you can give your feedback both for today and tomorrow together. I hope this has everybody's approval. We are not doing anything which is illegal, but we are trying to make sure that we don't push something on your shoulders which you are not ready for now. Having said that, I just want to move on to the activities. So the activities follow. The activities have been sent to you. It's a repeat of activity 4.1. But in relation to rights of Dalits, not women, Dalits, not women, only Dalits. Rights of Adivasis and rights of violations of the rights of denotified tribes. Yesterday we did women, yesterday we did children, yesterday we did right to food. Today we will do Dalits, we will do Adivasis and denotified tribes. That is activity number 5. Friends, we have always spoken in terms of violations. This course is introducing to you terminologies related to rights. And therefore, we would like you to relate rights and violations. And start looking at violations as the violations of certain rights that you know, which may fall under right to life, which may fall under right to equality, which may fall under right to liberty, and which may fall under right to dignity of the individual. Friends, don't leave the hall. Class is not over. I see some people moving. This is activity number 5. Activity 6 is requesting you visit the website of the IDSS, the NCDHR initiative. Please open these websites. That is an activity. Opening a website is an activity. And once you have done that, these are websites with tons of information. Once you have done that, then there are certain questions you have to answer about the IDSN website. There are questions to be answered as regards the HUC website, about the Right to Food campaign and the CHRI website. I repeat, you have 6.1 to open and 6.2 to answer 5 specific questions as regards each of the websites you have visited. By now, this activity list would have also reached you. 7th activity, very simple. 7.1, I read it out to you. Please do decide first on what information this relates to RTI. Decide what information you would like to ask from any department, ministry of the Government of India in relation to COVID. You decide what information you want. You read the newspapers, you read articles, you want some information, decide on what information you want and from which ministry you want it. It should be in relation to COVID. And there were good examples that Venkat gave us today. Second, after you have done that, after you know what question, which ministry, mention the department you want this information from, name it, and mention the public information officer of that ministry department. Information should be sought from an information officer, from a public information officer. And therefore, name the ministry, name the public information officer. That is your second part of the activity. And the third part of the activity, draft the question that you propose to ask in the RTI. Draft the question. Venkat will agree with me, in the whole RTI game, the most crucial part of the exercise is the questions and the drafting of the questions.
Absolutely right, Henry.
And therefore, we are just asking you today to draft the questions. Draft, show it to somebody at home, and they will tell you how poorly drafted it is. It happens to me many times. When I draft a question, I show it to some colleague in the office, and they tell me it can be interpreted this way, it can be interpreted this way. Remember, we are asking questions to government officials who are extremely clever animals. Therefore, sorry, I did something and yeah. And on the 19th afternoon, on Tuesday afternoon, present, not Monday, on Tuesday afternoon, don't come and say we don't have time. You can ask one question, you can ask 2 questions, it can be a serial of 3 questions. Show your draft questions in your group to your facilitators. Show your draft questions to your facilitators. And your facilitators, once they have approved the questions, or somebody else in the group who's very knowledgeable, can also, I mean, there are people who are extremely knowledgeable on RTI who must be sitting in these groups. Once you have approved, then these RTIs can be sent online. The manual of how to use the online has also been circulated to you. If there is any clarification required, our facilitators will help you on Tuesday afternoon. So I hope it is clear. Activity 5, 6, but activity 7 is compulsory. The first compulsory activity. Before module 1 is over, activity 7 has to be completed. And here on 19th, you have to give your questions. And if you don't, the next day you will be reminded. Please, friends, we are pushing you into this because if you don't wet your hands with an RTI, you will never engage in the movement for transparency in this country. I'm a tough teacher, only tough when matters like this come. Therefore, kindly do that. And I want to tell all of you, there might be some of you who would like to do more courses on RTI. Please contact Mr. Venkatesh. He does online courses for 1 month, 6 months, etc. 6 months. And you can thus be an RTI expert. Please contact him for such courses which he does throughout the country. And if some of you want it for some special category of people, do communicate with him. This 1.5 hours is only to introduce you to him. Thank you. I think we have crossed the time. Thank you. Thank you, Venkat. You're
Thank
still
you,
there, I know.
Henry. Thanks so
Thank you
much.
very, very much.
Thanks so much for giving me this opportunity.
Pleasure, pleasure, an honor. It's an honor for us.
Same here.
And I want to tell you all, we find that while some groups are recording 100% attendance, there are some people we have 14 to 15 absentees. And yesterday we had 23 absentees in the evening. I'm getting a little concerned about the absentees. So I kindly request our good friends, the facilitators, to communicate and find out why people were absent. I can understand there could be genuine reasons. We have no problem with genuine reasons. But if there's something that we have to correct on our side, we will. We will definitely look into this audio issue. There is some technical problem that has occurred today. We hope it doesn't occur in the future. So please listen to the YouTube, then carry out with your activities. No facilitators meeting today. The meeting will be held tomorrow, and you will also give in your feedback for today and tomorrow at the meeting held tomorrow. Is that okay? Thank you very much. Good evening. See you all tomorrow, 8:45 in the morning. We'll